for the best aerospace era. This is Mansplaining. Here's the host, Anthony L. Seeley.
Welcome, aerospace enthusiasts, to this extra section episode. Now, the U.S. has over 6,000 state parks. In these parks, you will find hiking trails, natural wonders, and historic landmarks. I want to tell you about one state park that has something more, something unexpected. At this park, you can see a pristine lake view, scenic hiking trails, a recreated pioneer town, and a real Gemini spacecraft that was commanded in orbit by one of the greatest astronauts in history, an astronaut who helped open the door to outer space. This is Spring Mill State Park, home to the Virgil Gus Grissom Memorial, located in Mitchell, Indiana. Our guest today manages and maintains the Lakeview Activity Center and the memorial dedicated to Gus Grissom. Welcome, everyone. Wade LaHue.
All right. Thank you so much. It's great to be here, Anthony.
Thank you for coming on Mansplaining. Now, before we get to the Gus Grissom and the memorial, tell us about Spring Mill State Park and how you came to work here.
Spring Mill State Park is an exceptional park here in our Indiana State Park system. It's our 6th park. We're coming up on the park's 100th anniversary here, and so 1927 to 2027, so we'll be doing a lot of celebrating. I grew up nearby in Salem, Indiana, and so remember coming to Spring Mill for field trips and stuff like that. We had family gatherings here, visiting the Pioneer Village and picnicking in the butternut and sycamore shelters. I started my DNR career actually at Hardy Lake State Recreation Area. I worked at the Dwight Chamberlain Raptor Center. I worked for all the way from a volunteer, cleaning, feeding, picking up bird scraps and cleaning bird poop off the walls, to managing that facility and rehabilitating hawks and eagles and owls. I lived there in a residence and took care of the 13 education animals. And then I met a girl and got engaged, and she lived in South Bend and I lived in around Madison, Indiana, Austin, Indiana. It was a 4-hour drive. So Pokagon State Park in northern Indiana opened up, and that was a closer commute. So I moved in with her, and then we were working at, she does the same work that I do. So she was at Potato Creek State Park, and I transferred to Pokagon. And then McCormick's Creek State Park opened up in Spencer, Indiana, and that's the park that she started at. It's her favorite property. It's Indiana's first state park. She's very passionate. And Spring Mill was open at the same time, and I grew up here in the community, in Salem, and knew the park. So we both double transferred out of Pokagon and Potato Creek and came to McCormick's Creek and Spring Mill. So that's how I came to be here for the last year and a half now.
Awesome. All right. And just for reference, Spring Mill State Park is located in Mitchell, Indiana, about 1.5 hours south of Indianapolis. According to the internet, Mitchell has a population of around only 4,000 people. But it also is the birthplace of Virgil Gus Grissom, who was born on April 3rd, 1926. Can you give me some background and the character of Mitchell, Indiana?
Well, like I said, I'm from Salem, so I didn't grow up here in Mitchell. Most of my experience before working here was just driving through on the way to Vincennes. It's a small town. It's originally a planned town, so they planned it on the railway. So it didn't come up on its own. They built it here on purpose. But for a small town, my experience with Mitchell, it is a bold town. It's a small dog with a big voice. They get a lot done here for the community. It's very engaged, very proud history, and a lot of people who work very hard to maintain the integrity and the image of the community. So it's got a lot of character. The Persimmon Festival here is a big event, right? And the community loves the Spring Mill. We have a lot of great support from the Community Foundation and just the folks that come out to support our events and attend. So we've got folks who have been coming here for almost as long as the park's been here. They've been coming as family reunions and things like that. So there's a lot of history between Mitchell and Spring Mill, and like I said, very passionate community. Despite maybe not being the biggest town, it's got a lot of passion, a lot of heart.
Gus Grissom was announced to be one of the Mercury 7. People knew his face, people knew his name. He became a national celebrity, but I don't think that many people could point at a map and tell you where Mitchell, Indiana
No.
is. Now, at the memorial, I really like how you profile his entire life. What are some of your favorite exhibits from Gus Grissom's early life?
Yeah, so we try to position the exhibits in the memorial so that you walk through the years. And so we start off with exhibits, pictures of him as a child and his childhood home, pictures of the community and what Mitchell was like at that time. I think the most exciting exhibit, the key part of that early section that we talk about, when I give field trips and we give tours, we have a selection of his report cards from when he was in school. And it's always good to show those. People think about the perfectionism, that goes along with a career like his, and the things, the excellence and quality of working hard. And, not everybody starts off their life in a position where they're maybe thinking that way. So his report cards aren't perfect scores. He didn't get perfect grades and everything. And I think it's, at least in my mind, it's encouraging to give that to students who come to the park so that they can have that to relate to maybe. If they've got lofty goals and aspirations and big dreams, it's okay if they're struggling in math or writing or something, because even heroes like Grissom, they started off with struggles too. So
Yeah, I believe it said he had a C in English, I think I saw.
yeah.
Now, he was a scout, from what I see in the exhibits. So is it possible that he camped here as a kid, or did he ever bring, dates as a teenager here?
Well, yeah, we know that he came here when he was young. He was in Scouts. We have a lot of artifacts from his time in Scouts, pins and things like that. We can talk more about that here in a little bit. But he was born in 1926, and the park was founded, like I mentioned, in 1927. So he and the park grew up side by side, living into the community. It was a big part of the community, and so he came here and spent time here growing up at the park. As far as a date, I don't know, maybe, very possibly, but I don't have any written or evidence that I'm aware of that. So
One other thing I like about the exhibit is a lot of people gloss over astronauts' aviation career before they would join NASA, but y'all don't do that here. Can you tell me about some of the exhibits from his aviation career?
Oh yeah, sure. We've got pieces from a young age, Gus was very passionate about flying. One of the trips his family took was, the family went and knew someone who had a plane, and they all took a ride in the plane. And this was a big keystone event in his childhood. They say that later on he had a birthday and he got a BB gun for his birthday, and he took it back to the guy who owned the plane and traded him the BB gun for another ride on the plane. So he enlists in the Army. He wants to fly, so he enlisted in the Army right at the end of World War II. So the war ended before he got to get off the ground and make any progress towards his aviation career really there. But that put him in line for the GI Bill, so when he came home, he went to Purdue. Right as he, goes through and gets his degree there, right as that part of his life is ending, America's in another conflict, the Korean War. So he enlists and serves there. We have his distinguished flying cross on display, some of the other amenities, his Bo Randall knife that was made part of his career later on. And we have a whole section about his time in Korea with quotes from him and his experience about not realizing for the first time he was was under fire, not realize, he thought it was something, maybe it was wrong with the plane or there was an issue because he didn't recognize the tracer rounds. It took him a second to figure out that he was being shot upon. So he serves there and earns his cross and returns. So after Korea, he goes, we have a section on the test pilot. He actually came back and he started working with as an airplane instructor, right, to teach others how to fly. But he had a wife and a son, and at that time that was considered one of the most dangerous occupations that a pilot could have. So instead of teaching others how to fly, he decided to pick the second riskiest activity and goes to Edwards Air Force Base in California and gets training to be a test pilot, to test out new aircraft. So just slightly less dangerous than teaching other people how to fly. And then he comes back to Wright-Patterson in Ohio, and they live there, and he tests out a lot of different aircraft. We've got models of several of the craft that he piloted in his time in Korea or test piloted there. And of course, that would go on to be one of the attributes that allows him to qualify in Mercury.
Yeah, it's great that y'all show all that. Also, I want to mention that before he went to Purdue, he was working to install doors on school buses.
That's right. Carpenter was a plant here in Mitchell, Indiana. It was a big business. They made a lot of different types of buses, but they made school buses predominantly, and he was putting doors on buses. So, and he did not enjoy that. That was after he came home from his time. That was before he went to Purdue. Yeah, he was working on that, and he was not happy. Betty talked about him, how displeased he was with that work.
Yeah, I liked in that video y'all mentioned how he was not content with just installing doors on school buses, but there is a theme of doors and hatches, which we'll get to later on. Now, before we cover the displays on his NASA career, I want to bring this awesome quote up you have from Gus Grissom. "If we die, we want people to accept it. We are in the risky business. We hope that if anything happens to us, it will not delay the program. The conquest of space is worth the risk of life." I love this quote. I get the sense that Gus Grissom, who was one of the best test pilots and one of the most important astronauts to the program, knew this endeavor for space was bigger than himself and was worth continuing no matter what the risk was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, having that in the memorial for people to read, especially young people, I think this is a sentiment today in an age of, independence, and it's a very self-oriented culture and that we live in. There's a lot of selfies and self-help. Not to say that those things don't have value, and it's a wonderful age for those mindsets. But this is a thing that this was a time of the group and the goals being more important than the individual. I think that sort of way of looking at things seems bold and outlandish maybe to some today, and it's important to bring these universals, or at least at that time, this patriotic, thing that so many people were involved in as a community together, right? And the evidence of that comes through when Gus talks about the importance of the mission over the importance of his own individual life.
Now let's talk about the scale model of his Mercury Redstone rocket in the Mercury display.
Yeah, so that's actually from Betty, his wife. She donated a large number of artifacts, so a lot of our collection is from his wife, Betty Grissom, and the Redstone rocket is one of those artifacts. Of course, he was selected, right, like I mentioned when we talked about being a test pilot. His test pilot hours and service there helped him to qualify to be part of the Mercury program. So they invited a certain number of different people that qualified. They reached out to them and gave them the information. They did physical tests, they did psychological tests, and whittled that number all the way down to the Mercury 7, right? And Gus, of course, fit all the criteria in the categories to be one. So he is the second of the Mercury astronauts after Alan Shepard. So his flight early on, the goals, we with the hindsight think about the program and the fact that Apollo would take us to the moon, right? Think about all the things we've done now in space. But the goals of the Mercury program were as simple as to put a man in space and for him to survive. That was pretty much the line that we were trying to cross. So the first two, Alan Shepard and Gus, both their missions were very short. They weren't orbits, right? So they shot them up and they fell back down. And that was all the test was. They're only about 15, 20 minutes. So Alan goes up, becomes a national hero. He's the first American to make it up into space. Gus's test, and with each of the tests, as the Mercury program would double each test. So they would do one, Alan Shepard's flight to go up and come back down. Gus's flight was the replica to make sure that wasn't a fluke and you could do it more than once. So each of the tests was in 2 stages. So Gus's test, of course, was to go up and come back down. Unfortunately, his was a little bumpier than Alan's. He went up and he came down just like we expected. All was well. But when he came down in the Liberty Bell, which was the name of the craft, landed in the Atlantic, the door came off. So there were bolts fastened to it that had explosives. So the door would be bolted on with explosive bolts. And the idea was that in the case of an emergency, Gus on the inside or crew on the outside could deploy the explosives and knock the door off in case they needed inside. Otherwise, the proper opening is at the tip of the capsule, and there was a chute that he would have to go through to get out. Right, so that would be the preferred method of entry and exit. So Liberty Bell hits the water, and the bolts detonate, and the door comes off. So the craft starts to fill up with water. Gus swims out into the Atlantic, and the helicopter comes in and, of course, deploys the chains to attach and pull Liberty Bell out. And the craft has filled so much that it begins to tug the helicopter down. So they have to cut the cables and abandon, and Liberty Bell sank to the bottom of the ocean. Gus, floating next to it, is waving frantically at the helicopter. And the pilot takes that as a sign that he is safe and they're free to try and haul it out. He's waving because the ports on his suit are also open and his suit is flooding with seawater, so he's sinking. So luckily the second craft comes in and is able to pick him up and take him over to the aircraft carrier where the ship was waiting. So NASA was a little displeased. They had expected that Gus must have panicked and deployed the bolts to get out of there. And it wasn't until 1999 that they were able to dredge up Liberty Bell 7, and it's generally believed now that he's not responsible. It was a wiring error, and the impact with the ocean water caused the door to come off.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And there's part of a quote that you have that I want to mention here. He says, after the water started flowing in, he says, "I've never moved faster in my life." And everyone's seen the spacesuits that they wore. It sounds like a nightmare trying to tread water in one of those.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. Now let's talk about your center attraction, the Gemini 3, the Molly Brown, the actual spacecraft he commanded in space on March 23rd, 1965. What does it mean to have Gus Grissom's Gemini here?
Oh, it's an incredible, privilege. It is the centerpiece of our exhibit. It was built, into the building when they brought it and lowered it by crane into the center of the building as they built around it and stuff. So it's a great honor and a great privilege to house an artifact like that and to care for it. And it's the display has changed over time. The quality and condition as we've had these artifacts longer, we've learned more about how to take care of them, and we've continued to update the standards of which we preserve it. The case around it, humidity modifiers or that monitor the humidity and things like that. We have a light monitor that monitors how much light can enter it and interact with it. Because back then we didn't know what they would be like and how they degrade over time. But as we've had these artifacts longer, we continue to make those updates. So it is his craft. I mean, he after Liberty Bell, of course, by that point we'd already decided we were going to the moon, right? So we needed the Gemini program as an interlude. It was a lot to think that we could take a 15-minute up and down that he was doing on the Liberty Bell and somehow turn that into landing on the surface of the moon. So we had a lot to learn. So after the Liberty Bell incident, Gus was very active, very engaged with the construction of this craft. He went to the McDonnell facility in St. Louis and was on the ground working all the time with the engineers. They called this the Gus Mobile. Right, the Gemini craft was nicknamed the Gus Mobile, and you take that as a good nickname or kind of a condescending one. He was apparently a pretty driven taskmaster about the things that he wanted. He fought and advocated for more astronaut control. Right, there was a big push that from the other side that most of the rocketry and any of the piloting that should all be done from the ground. And Gus pushed the other way and wanted to advocate for the control and the maneuverability and the astronaut's ability to interact with the machine and get it to function as their needs. They're the ones that are up there. They're the ones, they've got the hours and the test pilot and the training to do it. And so he advocated for that on the ground and at the McDonnell facility. So he actually wanted the craft to have wings that could be deployed so they could pilot and land the Gemini craft so that they wouldn't have to be one and done. They didn't obviously go for that, but that was an idea that came back around if you think about space shuttles, right? That re-landable wing. So he was early on advocating for things like that.
Yeah, I really love just looking at it. You can get an up-close view of it, and you can look at, this is where he sat. This is where he designed to where he can reach this control, he can reach that control. He's flipped that switch. It's amazing that you can just have it. And it's not a model. I've seen models, but this is the actual spacecraft, and it's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know much about musicals, but he named it the Molly Brown or the Unsinkable Molly Brown after a play.
That's right. Yeah, he names the craft after so it's about the Titanic. Molly Brown is a character who does not sink with the Titanic, right? So NASA does not take that very well. So that's part of the Gemini 3 struggle. So they were not happy with the name because it was a play off of the fact that the Liberty Bell 7 sank, and then his hope was that this one would be unsinkable. So NASA was a little frustrated. And then, of course, John Young, Gemini, had 2 astronauts, whereas Mercury craft only had 1. So Gus Grissom and John Young went up. John Young had a sandwich. He had a sandwich that he pulled out, and so that one of the things that were tested in the Gemini program was food and what kind of food you should eat in space. And he had a corned beef sandwich from Wolfie's, which was a diner near the base, and he brought it up, snuck it in his spacesuit. That's not the kind of food that we're supposed to be testing. So he pulled it out, and Gus took one bite of the sandwich. They passed it back and forth in there, and it was just oil everywhere, from that greasy sandwich inside. So they packed it away. No technical issue from the sandwich, but NASA was also not pleased with that. So.
And also you have the Titan II missile scale model, which I think is awesome, but we'll get back to the scale models here soon enough. Now we have to talk about a difficult subject, the tragedy of Apollo 1.
Yeah, really a dark day for the American space program. The first real major accident. After, taking the lead on the Gemini program, Gus was put in charge of the first of the Apollo missions. So he and Ed White and Roger Chaffee were the 3. So again, we've gone up from Mercury 1 astronaut, Gemini 2 astronauts, to the 3 astronauts of the Apollo. And there was a big change between the Liberty Bell 7's design and Molly Brown's design to this new Apollo craft, as far as the wiring, the structure, the way it was made. John Young even mentions in our display video that plays about there were a lot of concerns. All the astronauts involved knew that there was a lot of wiring issues and concerns, and he makes the comment that they were astronauts. They paid them to fly. They didn't pay them to worry about wiring. So there were a lot of concerns internally about that system. So Apollo 1's mission was just to do a lot of tests with this new equipment, to orbit the Earth as the others had with this new craft. Unfortunately, there on the launch pad, the doors were sealed and would open inward instead of outward to try and prevent an accident like Liberty Bell 7. So the doors were sealed. They were on the launch pad doing an exercise, doing just pre-launch all the way up to launch, and then they would leave. So after a long day inside of there, they're talking about how uncomfortable stuff is, and there's a spark from the wiring inside the capsule. The oxygen environment in there was 100% oxygen in that capsule. And with the door pressurized, they couldn't open the door from the inside. And all three of the astronauts passed away.
It was a really tragic story. In this, we had to learn this lesson, the painful lesson about we got to make sure the wiring's better. And a lot of people point the fingers at North American who made the Apollo spacecraft. But I want to bring up this story because the Soviets learned this in another painful way. All the way back in 1961, there was a cosmonaut named Valentin Bondarenko. Now, part of their training, they would be put in a chamber, in a pressure chamber by themselves for 10 days. And they had an oxygen-rich environment. And on the 10th day, he started taking off his sensors on his chest to monitor his heart and whatnot. And he used a piece of cotton, which was soaked in alcohol, to help rub away, the sticky part that held on the sensor. And he just absentmindedly just tossed it. And it happened to land on a heating plate, which he used to make food. It landed on that. Instantly, he was engulfed in flames. And this was 1961. And he actually lived a few hours, made it to the hospital in agonizing pain, but he died not long after. So that's why the Soviets didn't use oxygen-rich environments either. And there was no way for them to warn NASA, even if they wanted to. None of the engineers, because that'd be treason, and they'd be shot. Because this is the Cold War, and you're selling information about top-secret, space-age technology. Also, one other story I want to bring up. Roger Chaffee wasn't originally on this crew. It was supposed to be an astronaut named Don Isley, but he suffered an injury to his shoulder, so his backup, Roger Chaffee, took his place, which is an interesting story I just recently came across. There's a reason why Gus Grissom was on this crew. He was a prime astronaut. Like, this is a prime crew. This crew could have been to the moon.
Absolutely, yeah.
We would be talking about Gus Grissom instead of Neil Armstrong.
Absolutely.
Had this, not occurred. Now, do you have any special events planned for Gus Grissom's, what would be his 100th birthday next April?
Yeah, so it is coming up. I can't put forth any details right now. We are going to plan, at least some activities. I guess you could say, unfortunately, for the program here, I'll be on new parent leave, so I will not be here in the park to oversee that activity. So we'll have some options put together, and I'll be working with property management to get those squared away before I leave on new parent leave. But we will have an event, yes, on his birthday in April.
That sounds awesome. Well, I want to share a few thoughts I have here at the end, but in the meantime, I want to thank you for coming on, talking to us on Mansplaining, and I want to thank everyone here who works on the Spring Mill State Park and the Virgil Gus Grissom Memorial, who maintain it and keep this place running.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
I highly recommend you come visit the Spring Mill State Park. After you come through the entrance gate, you will see the Virgil Gus Grissom Memorial right on your right. Check that out first. Learn about his life and accomplishments. Look at the exhibits from his report cards to the scale models of the Redstone, the Titan II, or the Saturn V rockets, and of course, the Gemini 3. Afterwards, go hit the hiking trails and see the lake, the caves, the pioneer town, and the cemetery. I recommend you bring a date, your family, friends, or come alone and get away from technology and social media. We all need an escape from that. And where else in the country can you experience the pioneer age and the space age in one place? And here are just a few thoughts I have on Gus Grissom. People should know his name and know his story because he was one of the greatest astronauts during the best aerospace era. As I said before, there's a theme of doors in Gus Grissom's life, from installing doors on school buses in his hometown in Mitchell, to the hatch that inadvertently blew open on his Mercury Liberty Bell 7, to the hatch of Apollo 1 that tragically could not be opened in time to save him, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. But for Gus Grissom, the most significant door in his life was the door he helped open to explore space for America and mankind. I'll close this out with that profound quote from Gus Grissom. If we die, we want people to accept it. We are in a risky business. We hope that if anything happens to us, it will not delay the program. The conquest of space is worth the risk of life. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, there's always a light at the end of the runway.
Follow Mansplaining for more stories from the best aerospace era, or go to bestaerospaceera.com or find us on social media.